Earthworks and fortifications predate the Civil War, but the increased firepower and accuracy and range of shoulder-carried firearms as well as rifled artillery would all but necessitate the use of more earthworks, fortifications, and semi-permanent fortifications in the Civil War. As the war started, a whole bunch of officers might have thought hiding behind breastworks or being behind breastworks or earthworks was somehow undignified, or that those troops would not be inclined to go out from those breastworks and actually launch attacks and fight. But as the Civil War went on, it became clear to soldiers on both sides, officers and privates alike, that somehow, if you could get something between you and the enemy, it not only saved life, but it could also turn your defensive force into one that could repel an enemy attack of 3, 4, 5 times its number. Even a small fortification that a soldier might be able to dig, a simple earthwork, an 18 inches high, 2 feet thick, that in itself could help slow or stop bullets and really keep your command safer. And that's something troops did increasingly as the Civil War went on. Now that's the simplest format. These trenches were, as the war went on, much deeper, much more substantial, until these were substantial earthworks. Sometimes they had revetments, something that would keep steady walls in there, and they could also bank out spots for artillery to fire through. They could also have head logs on top of that, which would protect your head while you look through a small area and fire at your enemy. And it's not just earth. You're going to use the natural terrain around you. You're usually not going to construct a defensive line on some sort of a low reverse slope at the bottom of a valley. No, you're going to try to be on the military crest like we are here on Little Round Top. But you could also use rails from fences. You could use anything you could get your hands on. There are photos that show Confederate fortifications in Atlanta and Cold Harbor, and they're using picket fences in their fortifications. Anything that could stop bullets or repel some sort of enemy fire. In some cases, especially when you might be there for a little while, you might make some sort of a semi-permanent fortification. This could be a lunette, something behind which you put one cannon. A lunette is sort of a demi-lune or half-moon shaped fortification. You could put one cannon, you could put an entire regiment behind a particularly large lunette, such as the 2nd Texas Lunette at Vicksburg. You could also have a redan. A redan is like a lunette, but it doesn't have to be moon-shaped. It could be triangular or otherwise, but it has an open back like the 3rd Louisiana redan at Vicksburg as well. Or you could have a full-on redoubt, and that is more of what we call a fort today. It is fully enclosed, and that fort would normally have bomb proofs. It could have covered ways so you could move throughout the fort in safety. It would have some sort of a step where you could step up and shoot under the headlogs, any sort of advantage that you could slow down your enemy with. Now, you don't just build a fort or an earthwork, okay? You need to prevent against things that might happen to you while you're there. If you are behind an earthwork and they get around that earthwork, you are suddenly in trouble. That is, unless you construct traverses next to that earthwork, which might allow part of your unit to turn to one side and fire in another direction. And there are a number of other things you're going to want to do. Number one, you're going to want a clear field of fire in front of your fortification to the degree possible. Field of fire is one of the most important things of the Civil War, especially with defensive tactics. So you're going to want a clear field of fire. Ideally, you will have a fortified picket line in front of your fortification, and somewhere out in front, you also might want obstructions to your enemy. Abattis or entanglements or chevaux de frise, pointed logs that are going to point out towards your enemy, anything to slow them down while they're trying to get you. The fortress itself had to also be conducive to the time in which it was. You have an incredibly powerful facility, a brick fort called Fort Pulaski, which was seen to be impregnable. Robert E. Lee helped design the thing. It has walls more than 11 feet thick in some places, and yet, once it was subject to Union long-range, powerful rifled artillery fire, it was decimated. And suddenly the days of the brick fort were over. Right across from Fort Pulaski, a little ways down, is Fort McAllister, which is an earthen fort, which could absorb those long-range shells that really couldn't do damage to the fort. And if it did, you could just pile some more dirt up, and there you go. Within your fort itself, you are also going to have things very basic like sandbags and gabion baskets. These are sort of baskets that you could fill with earth and would help strengthen your particular fortress. These fortifications were not meant to be permanent, but in many cases, soldiers simply spent a couple of days working on an earthwork, and we can go back more than 150 years later and still see very impressive earthworks. So go to Petersburg, go to Vicksburg, see these impressive fortifications, and learn just a little bit more about the Civil War.